record button, and then go ahead and on the bottom underneath the numbers, we have the... Oh, there you go. You got it. Here we go. 3, 2. Hey, everyone. It is episode 432 of This Is Whole Life, where, of course, you already know it's time for rest. That is, if you were listening last week. So what I want you to do right now is turn the volume down. Maybe close the shade. If you happen to be driving or operating heavy equipment, take the sunshade down a little bit. Block that sun. Put your sunglasses on. If you have something cuddly and warm to put on. Breathe deep. Melanie, breathe deep. Breathe deep.
Oh, I'm breathing deep. Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
I am definitely having you record me an ASMR for us to help me go to sleep.
Oh, I
that was pretty amazing.
I don't know what that is, but I thank you. It works for my wife, so I thought maybe this morning we would just get you all in the restful mode. Because if you were here last week, you knew that we were heading for rest after a summer of play, a 5 or 6 weeks of get to work. And now rest. Doesn't it feel good? Although I was kind of with the people that were like, hey, only 1 week of rest. And Ken's like, got all biblical on us. And he's like, oh, God, good enough for God. It's good enough for us. I'm like, fine. That's how it's got to be. That's all we're going to get for rest. Well, if you weren't here, maybe this is your first time. This is Whole Life is a podcast of the Whole Life Church in Orlando, Florida. Every week we dig a little bit deeper into the message and the topics we are discussing, the things we are doing here at Whole Life Church in Orlando. Of course, we would love to hear from you. Podcast at wholelife.church or voicemail or text 407-965-1607. Join the conversation. So, rest. Ken, who is to my right, which is right. And Melanie, who's across the table, as always. And to my left, of course, it's Lucas. So tell me, rest. What's your best rest? What's your favorite rest?
For me, it's alone time, like just truly alone time. I hate to say it, but I really, really like just being completely alone. Maybe listening to some music, working on a puzzle, working on nothing.
But alone.
Alone.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's good. Melanie?
I'm ditto. I hate to be, so unoriginal, but yes, alone.
Lucas?
Lately, a very unhealthy one, sitting on the couch and scrolling on social media.
Oh, yeah.
So does that give you rest or does it give you angst? Because for me, it's like the angst
I think
part.
it's a mix of both.
Well, the best way to avoid that is to have a very, very uncomfortable house full of furniture that just doesn't set well, doesn't lend itself to being sitting on it for more than half an hour before your legs go numb or you have a spring in your underside.
That was oddly specific, Randy.
Yeah, well, ask me how I know. We ended up getting a new couch this week, a sectional. So it's it's all your pieces and it can be in one. And I sat down Thursday night, I think Thursday night for football season started, and I was like, oh. I might never get off this couch like ever and ever. It's like comfortable. So, I think you got to pick your chairs wisely.
Yeah.
If that rest for me, man, I don't know what my favorite. I think it's if what's the purpose of rest? If we're going to rest, is it so that we feel more rejuvenated, so like in our being? Is it so that we feel more rested, like I'm just tired, I need to sleep? Is it all those things? What's the goal?
Restoration.
Oh, then that's the Harley then. Yeah, that's hands down.
Oh, look at how quickly you knew exactly what it was.
Yeah, well, as soon as I knew for sure what we were going to define that part. Yeah, that doesn't even, because I can go without sleep. That's not a like that part, sleep when you're dead. That's fine for me.
I have to rethink scrolling then.
Then you got. Would you like to change your answer?
We didn't want to say anything to you, Lucas, but we're glad you were able to hit that conclusion on your own.
If you'd like to change your answer, you may.
I would say sports.
Yeah.
yeah,
Peace
okay.
of mind.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
Okay.
Participation or viewing, both.
I think both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair.
You know, the funny thing for me is like my picture of rest is my dad laying on the floor with headphones and the record player in our 1980s home. He would get home after a day of working as a physician's assistant. Some days he would just walk into the door, go to that record player, put his headphones on, lay down flat on the floor, and listen to music for, I don't know, 30 minutes or whatever, and then kind of become re-engaged with the family. But so many times I'd walk into the living room after going to bed to get water, right? And my dad is laying on the floor listening to music. And that was, so to this day, that's like my picture of rest for me. And I think I feel that way a certain way myself, that, you know, just being quiet, having, or maybe listening to some music, something that appeals. But, you know, it was interesting. I've, over the last, I don't know, a couple of weeks, I've just started, I often will listen to books on my drive in or drive out, or sometimes music. And the last couple of weeks, I've actually just started experimenting with doing nothing on the drive home or on the drive here, just having quiet time with no radio, no nothing, just silence. And it's been an interesting, there's been it actually has felt somewhat restful to do that.
Are you also trying to get a full 8 hours of sleep? What are you like?
I probably, if you looked at my Apple app that keeps track of my life, of all the things, I actually probably have a pretty good. I usually am getting between 7 and 8 hours of sleep, somewhere in there. So I think I'm probably averaging about 7.5 hours of sleep.
Well, that's right. You're not really like a coffee or caffeine person, so you really do need that rest.
Well, Randy, you might be surprised to find out that the caffeine is not a substitute
For what?
For rest. I mean, you can argue with me later, but
okay, well, we're going to go on Ken's premise right now. Okay, so I mean, we'll have to talk. We may have to have a follow-up episode on this, but we'll go with Ken's premise.
My life's changed a lot with Rochelle being in it. You know, I was definitely, prior to being married, late night person. Rochelle is early to bed, early to rise. And then I had a couple jobs right out of college that were early morning jobs, and so I kind of have gotten into the habit of trying to be in bed and going to sleep by about 9:30, 10.
Ooh. Lucas, that sounded painful from over there. Like, oh,
No.
Was that a goal?
This is a goal
That's
for
a
me.
goal?
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't know what I would do at that time except stare at the ceiling and listen to the worms crawl into the house.
Well, and maybe just do a couple cups of coffee less before that time.
Yeah.
Might help a little bit. I'm not trying to be judgmental.
No judgment taken. I'm like, wow, 9:30, huh? Although, I mean, there's times when, you know, Emily's usually, we're trying like an 8:30, like now that she's going to school again, got to get up in the morning, and I don't know how helpful that's really been. It's still been a struggle. And I think, man, I could probably go to bed. I mean, if I read her stories, I might fall asleep for a little bit, but I mean, usually it can't go the whole night.
The sound of your own voice puts you to sleep too.
Yeah, we just need to record you, Randy, and just let you listen to yourself and see if that helps you at all.
It might.
The other important thing for me is, like, I do my best writing in the morning early, like first thing when my brain is kind of less, you know, has less going on. If I wait till the afternoon to try to work on my sermon, I can do okay research at that point, but trying to put things into sequential order, just writing it all, I like to wake up early and do that for a couple hours before I do anything else.
Nice.
So if I can schedule myself ideally, the way my ideal day goes is early morning, is time for writing and anything that requires kind of more horsepower out of my brain. And then meetings, other things like that, I like to save for the afternoon, and except on Tuesdays.
Meetings, so when someone else might need your brain, it's like, look, I'm sorry, I can only bring 55%. I used the best top 25 for myself this morning. Is that what you're saying? So
yeah, that maybe didn't sound exactly the way I would want you to make it sound there, Randy. But yeah,
schedule your meetings with Ken early.
Yes.
Yeah. No. And our meetings in the morning, we do pretty good.
We do.
Yeah. So how about that? All right, 1942, 59% of Americans get 8 hours or more of sleep. What 1942, had electricity been invented yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Randy, it had.
Okay. So they did have electricity. I think they must have had radios back then.
I will say, though, by when was the Rural Electrification Act? You remember when that came in?
You going to Google it?
Yeah, I'll Google that.
So while Ken's Googling that, we jump over now, 59%, 1942. 2023, the data shows that less than 26% of Americans get more than 8 hours of sleep a night. And most get about 53% are getting 6 to 7. And then there's the Randys, 20% getting 5 hours or less. No, and I would say for much of my life that was true. But I would say probably the last 6 months I've been getting close to that 7 hours.
Good.
So, that's not too bad.
I think they say anything around 7.
Yeah.
Is and I think the other important thing is that different people require different amounts of sleep. Our bodies are different. Different people have different needs when it comes to sleep. So I have to be careful about judging Randy too hard on these things. So maybe my grandmother, I don't know, for as long as I've known her, that she gets about 4 or 5 hours, but then she'll take a nap in the afternoon.
Nappers, yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know how that all. I guess we could have a doctor in here who specializes.
Does anybody here nap and then feel refreshed?
I do. It depends on how I do it.
Okay. I'm not if I nap, I'm like, oh, why'd I do that?
It has to be a short nap.
Yeah,
short.
It needs to be 30 minutes or less.
Yeah.
30 minutes or less. Do you set an alarm?
I do.
Well, see, then it feels like it's more structure, and then it's like that doesn't feel like a treat or a special thing. Like, I'm really tired. I'd like to take a nap. I don't want to put an open end on. I want to open end this baby.
Well, that's why you don't feel refreshed, right?
Yeah,
it's a doing this
power nap
thing wrong.
No, the first time I really saw somebody doing this was when I was working in the Kentucky Tennessee Conference of Seventh-day Adventist, and one of my bosses there would have lunch, and this guy was so regimented, which I admire. It was at noon he would get his little sack lunch out, brown bag lunch. He would eat, and then he would close his door, turn off the light in his office. He had a little couch in there. He'd lay down for about 30 minutes. He'd get up and get going again. And man, I'll tell you what, I think it really works. I mean, very healthy, he just had really good habits. It was kind of inspiring, to be honest.
In Argentina, this is a tradition. They call it siesta time.
Ooh.
So everything closes after lunch for an hour.
For an hour?
Yeah. And then people get back and...
An hour.
See, there's always things you can learn from other places. I like that. I feel like that's
time.
I like that. So I actually looked up because we all laughed at you a little bit, Randy, about electricity being invented. It was electricity was invented probably in the early 1900s, right? Late 1800s, somewhere in there. But what I was talking about was the United States decided they wanted electricity out in all the little small communities where you couldn't really, the small communities couldn't really afford to bring electricity in. So it was actually in 1936 that Roosevelt and Congress passed the Rural Electrification Act in May of 1936, and that started providing money to provide electricity out in small rural communities. And so really by 1944, like you were saying, by that point, most of America was just beginning to have consistent electric power.
Pretty new.
So to your point, yes, I think that was probably right about when most Americans were just beginning to have electricity and had something to do with it,
And I was still probably smaller part of the population than people living in the big cities and all the rest of it. But I liked how during the message, there's always lessons to learn no matter how many times you listen to the story of the children of Israel. And you were talking about there's no stillness in our life, there's no time. And then you kind of look at you go back almost in like the Wayback Machine, and it's like they had nothing but time. Like that's all they had was time. And so finding the rest doesn't seem like it's just about, do I have time to do it? Do I have a desire to do it? I mean, I think it's more about the desire than the time, because obviously they had a lot of time. But maybe defining the rest, like we talked about, what is the rest? It's restoration. But then who's the restorer? And when you put it next to the children of Israel, who are like, look, we got the promised land. We've got this right before us. We know that God's been good to us, because you were talking about the spies that went in, and only 2 of them were like, yeah, we can totally do this. Of course they're giants, but dude, check out these grapes. Like that's a meal for a month. Like for one, like this, a grown man can be fed on a single grape. You said, but walking to rest, standing right on the edge of the promised land and not believing God could walk me right in. And you think, that was the Israelites. But yet, you said, and I fear as one of your pastors at this church that you're standing right on the edge of rest. But the giants inside of rest are too big. And you're not willing to step over that border and claim what God promised you. And I was like, ooh, Ken brought the big hardware this week. That was like the velvet sledgehammer has no velvet. That was all sledgehammer. But I think that maybe I wrote myth, but I don't know that that's the word that I want to use, that keeps us from finding the rest in the salvation, the work that's been done, is that the giants or our giants have to be killed or dead to us before we're worthy of maybe asking or allowing us to do that?
No, I think it's more. I think it's more of us feeling like it's our responsibility to take out the giants. That I think it's. I don't think it's even about waiting for giants to die. It's that I think that I have to wait for them to die, or I think that I have to go and be the one that's going to figure out how to conquer these different giants. And I think one of the major messages of the Old Testament and New Testament, especially maybe the New Testament, is the idea that God has it all taken care of already, and your job is simply to go where God leads, to follow. And I think that probably is one of the things as a pastor, as a person, I'm most passionate about. I firmly believe that God goes in front of us, and so many times we try to get in front of God. And I spent the first part of my life trying to tell God to bless the things I was doing, and instead of asking God to help me do the things that He's doing. And the whole point, when the Israelites finally get done with 40 years of wandering in the wilderness and they finally do go into the promised land, God makes it abundantly clear that the only way they're going to conquer, the only way they're going to succeed is if God is doing the work. I mean, when they march around Jericho, they don't build siege weapons that bring down the walls. They don't starve the people out of the city. The walls fall the walls fall. God makes the walls fall. And that's how the victory happens. It's not something they do. And then at one point when they try to go take another smaller city than Jericho on their own, it doesn't work out for them. And the other fascinating thing, Randy, is that they go into the promised land and God doesn't just push all the giants and all the people out of, He doesn't do it all, at one time. It's like it's a process that happens. And I think we get impatient with God. I think firstly we're like, well, things aren't changing. I've prayed about it. I've asked, and things aren't happening the way that I want it to, in the time that I want it to. And if you're like me, you there are things that you like, you grew up being told, don't do this, don't do that, do this, and those things aren't happening. You're like, okay, God, I want to pray about it. Please help me to not do this and help me to do this. And you pray about it sometimes for years, and it doesn't happen. You say, well, what happened to that whole verse about if I ask for any good thing in God's name, He'll give it to me. I mean, I can understand if I'm asking for $1 million that maybe. I mean, I think that's a good thing, but maybe God doesn't. Maybe God thinks my character wouldn't be able to withstand that. But when I'm asking to get rid of my temper that flares with my wife or my kids, when I'm asking for something like that, I know that's a good thing. I know that's a great thing. And so why isn't God conquering the giants in my life when I've been praying about it for years? Why won't God deal with this? And I think that, again, this is where, for me, this message of rest comes in. I'm not saying quit asking. What I'm saying is rest.
Yeah.
Trust that if you've asked and God doesn't do it, that's God's problem at that point.
It's such a mixed message, I think, that we receive sometimes because we hear, Jesus paid it all and God is the one who's going to complete the work in you. And then on the other side of that, like you said, Ken, if it's not happening, then the message, at least that I've received in my life, was you're just not surrendering hard enough.
Oh yeah.
And
you're not doing your part. That's the literal words that get. I've said those words, so I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but that is a clear message that gets sent out. It's like, well, you've asked God, but what are you not doing? Mm-hmm. Because you must be doing. There's something that God does His work, but you have your work to do.
Yeah, it's the but in there. And I think that becomes, talking about yokes, I think that in order to be in a quote-unquote yoke of rest, we have to break out of the yoke of work. And I think that can be so internalized that we're not talking about, we're talking about layers and upon layers upon layers. I remember going to I was speaking at a women's conference one time, and I went into the hallway and I saw a lady that was sitting by herself and she was crying, and so I just walked over and sat next to her and, I said, what's going on? And she said, I'm not worthy. I can't do what I'm supposed to do. I just keep asking God, and it's not happening, and I'm failing.
Ouch.
And, I could sit there next to her and tell her cognitively all the reasons why, no, that's not true. But that would only basically glaze the surface of that internalized yoke of I have to do all the things myself.
So
grace is for losers.
Well, grace isn't really grace, though, right? It's grace is for those who are good enough to deserve grace.
Right.
You have to do your part to deserve grace is the message that often gets sent. Mm-hmm. And that really is the exact opposite of what grace is. Grace is completely undeserved. And that's what I genuinely worry about so many times, is that sometimes intentionally, sometimes very unintentionally, people like me, including me, send the message to people that you just need to try a little bit harder. Just give it a little bit more. If you're not seeing breakthroughs, it's because you didn't say the prayer the right way. You didn't have enough willpower. You're not exercising your willpower enough. So when things don't happen, because we can't blame God, it has to be me. it has to be me, because it can't be God's fault, because God's perfect and God doesn't make mistakes, and God doesn't. And so when my child struggles with drug addiction or whatever, or it must have been me. It must have been me. I must have, that third Tuesday of the month, I must have forgotten to pray enough for my child. And this is what happened. And again, I don't want to say that there aren't things that we do that definitely play into issues in our own lives and other people's lives. But I will never, ever forget as a college student being in a church and preaching a sermon where I talked about how I had made some mistakes in my life, and my parents took it personally, and I said that, well, we should have done things different for you. And during the sermon, I said, the mistakes I made in my life were my fault, not my parents. My parents I think they were great parents. They certainly did the best that they could.
Yeah.
And the mistakes I made, those are on me. Those are my decisions. And I said, there's a lot of parents that really, there's a heavy weight on them. And again, not to say that we don't really try hard to be the best parents we can, but at some point we have to let go and just say, look, I am done. I am a human being. I am doing the best that I can, and put it there. And I'll never forget that the person, this is back in the days where there were people sitting behind you when you were preaching, and at the end of the sermon, turn around, and one of the guys that was sitting behind me was a high-level Seventh-day Adventist official, and he was weeping. And after the sermon, he came and hugged me. He said, that was what I needed to hear. He said, I've just been struggling so much because I feel like a horrible parent because my kids aren't doing what I think they need to be doing.
So let me ask you something then, because you're saying the mistakes that you made are on you.
Yeah.
But are they on you? If that's so, I'll ask this question differently. If God is responsible for doing the work in you, and you make a mistake, is that on you or is that on God?
God carries it. For me, I feel like it is on me because I have free will and I have agency and I can make decisions. But so for me, I feel like that's...
Go back, it's a trap.
I know it's a trap. So, yeah, no, but I do feel like as human beings, we have free will, we have agency. And so when we make mistakes, the good news of the gospel is that those mistakes have been covered by God, and that God has grace for us and works with us. So for me, that's where I'm at, Melanie. So you want to talk about where you're at with that?
No, I do not.
Okay.
Well, time and I don't know, maybe mystery a little bit. We had a question about what is the yoke, as you were talking about that rabbis, always had the yoke, and whether, and Jesus was the opposite of everyone else. Everyone else had all these things you had to do, and Jesus is like, no, my yoke is easy. So we had a question about what is the yoke? And someone from the chat, just to clarify, asked, are you asking what process or processes actually cause us to be yoked to Jesus, or what does Jesus' yoke look like in a day-to-day way? And they responded, I don't understand how to apply the imagery to my life practically, because I see a person putting their head in a literal yoke, but I know that isn't what I'm actually supposed to do literally. I'm not sure if I'm making sense. So like taking the yoke and making that, and Melanie, you mentioned there was yoke of work, yoke of rest. Are there multiples from Jesus that we're supposed to do or that we're supposed to participate with?
I think the word yoke, it means to bind together. The way that we use it when we talk about, oxen, for example, is you are binding together two oxen that will then do the work. I think what Jesus was talking about was, I mean, there's the metaphor there, but I think what Jesus is talking about is a binding that takes place where you and God have a connection and you're bound together.
Maybe an easier metaphor in the world that we live in. My favorite one is a parent taking their child's hand and holding it and walking together somewhere. I love that because now I love the idea of putting my hand in God's hand and saying, God, I want you just to lead me wherever you want to go, and I'm going to ask you to hold on to my hand. Again, my theological framework tells me that God doesn't force me to hold his hand, that I have agency and I have the choice of whether I want God to hold my hand or not. And so for me, it is a choice on a regular basis to say, hey, God, go ahead and take my hand and walk with me and help me walk the direction you want to go. And for me, that has been a very liberating thing in my life, because what it means is that when things don't go the way that when I make mistakes, when I do things that I know aren't helpful and often are hurtful to others, I don't say that, well, God's grace covers that. I need to go ahead and say, hey, I made a mistake here. And I say, and God's grace covers that mistake. I don't think we need to say, well, God's grace means I don't ever have to apologize in any way. I don't have to admit that I did anything wrong. I think God's grace is the peace of mind that when I do make those mistakes, that I don't worry about my salvation. I don't worry about whether God loves me or not. I know that God loves me.
I think that's why it's so fraught. It's because it's attached to this idea of salvation. Those mistakes. When I was growing up, I had I was in this paradigm where I felt like you have to choose to be saved. You have to make that choice. You have to go down to the front. You have to stand up in front of everyone. You have to make this choice to be saved. And somewhere in my late 20s or early 30s, I kind of had a paradigm shift, reading about, righteousness by faith. And the new paradigm that I took on was you have to choose to be lost. That's the active choice that you have to make. And that so took the pressure off of me, because then it didn't matter. And that's where I came across that text in Hebrews where it says, by one sacrifice, he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. And that clicked with me. It's like your default is you're safe.
That denotes a process too.
Mm-hmm. It does. Yeah. And the process then is the you're safe part is the perfect. You're safe. Relax. And now let's just do the process of making you look like me. God, I'm
sure,
speaking
of course.
Yeah.
But because I think the time, that was another thing that was being discussed in the chat was, and Ken mentioned it earlier, the time when it feels like, I've asked, I've done this. And if you're doing that from a place of, I'm not sure, man, that really seems a little more fraught with a little more hand-wringing, a little more, man, did I do enough today? Did I do, did I meet the minimum bar, instead of, hey, I'm okay. And check out what I learned today. I stumbled across that verse in Hebrews, which really, kind of put me at rest today and maybe for the week. So maybe I'm a little more open to what God is talking about, or maybe, but nothing seems to ever tighten the timelines.
Well, that's the rest part. The rest part is recognizing you're safe. And I think sometimes we don't realize the amount of anxiety we're carrying around until we let go of it. And that sensation of recognizing that you can let go of the anxiety, that is entering into rest, because there's rest for you internally.
But you're also, what you just said about, when you said be safe, there was a part of old Adventist Randy that was like, ooh, there's that crowd over there like, you guys got the tomatoes? All right. She says it again, throw. On 3. No, but people that are in a place where, and I know, and I've been there, but it feels like, oh, you're saved. So you think you're just confident.
You don't
now?
ever say you're saved
you
because
don't- right, you
that's
don't
too
say it out loud
presumptuous.
because then, and so
For being a bunch of Bible believing people who talk about it, we really have a really hard time accepting John's words that I write this so that you may know.
no, right? Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's sad to me, because here's what we know. Fear is a very good short-term motivator. If you need somebody to get something done really quick, scaring them into doing it, instilling fear will work, and it'll work quickly. But if you want something to be long-lasting and to be internalized, intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic motivation, fear is an extrinsic motivator, but love is an intrinsic motivator. And that's why the Bible says that perfect love casts out fear, and we do things out of a love relationship. And the problem with the literally scaring the hell out of people, where that term came from, the scaring people into behaviors, is that it doesn't last. It's one of the reasons why we see so many people who are being motivated that way go and do things that are in the complete opposite direction of what they've been preaching to other people about how they need to be. Because fear is a lousy long-term motivator. It only works so long, and it only works as long as you really think that thing is going to hurt you.
Right.
Unless you can systematize it. If
Yeah.
you can systematize that fear, especially within an organization that people want to belong to, then you can make it perpetual.
Right.
But it's hard when someone that you love, sees it differently than you do when it comes to salvation, and it seems into grace, and that opposite thing we talked about of grace early on, where to say with confidence, because if you can't say with confidence, I know that I'm saved, then you're not resting. You're not finding that peace. You're not finding what, like you said, that paradigm shift that helps you go, okay, now let's move from this other more settled, more comforting
Rest.
I mean, from that position of rest. But because if at the end of the day, the alternative is, and I don't understand, this is the part that always just gets me when we can't make that jump, or we don't understand why we can't get there, is it seems like, well, if I say it, I'm not sure I should say it, and I look at the things I want to do, the thing like Paul said, everything I don't want to do is exactly what I do, and you get caught up in all of that. It's so hard to claw out and see yourself, because you know all the grime, but also you forget that, well, obviously God sees all the same thing, and He already said. So, but to watch someone just go, man, I'm jealous of you because you live differently, and you're also not projecting that on me. You're not saying to me, well, how come you don't do that better? Or how come, you got some stuff to work on before, you can think about that. Yeah, I got stuff to work on. I got a ton of stuff. I got way more than I need. But to think that it either has to come down to, like you said, so that, well, in John's words, or even John 3:16, it's pretty succinct about what it says. For those who believe, and you can say, well, but then it's, I feel like that's like watered down grace. That's just saying, well, once saved, always saved. But your position that you said, I really like that, because it's not saying that I don't have work to do, or that I want to be better, or that I want to have a better relationship with God. It's just saying, I'm taking you at face value because you're perfect and you said so, and I believe you. And so I'm gonna rest in that, and then I'm gonna work, and then we're gonna fight all the other battles that we have to do from a better position.
Well, and think about the ripple effect. If you are in a place of safety and you know that you are loved and accepted, it's a lot easier to love and accept other people.
Yeah.
If you are in a situation where you feel like someone is punitively towering over you, watching your every move, and kind of almost rooting for you to fail, then that's how you're going to treat other people.
Yeah.
So it's not just a personal theology, because it has a ripple effect on everyone around you.
Yeah. And to me, that's that kind of like we talked last week. There's that gratitude of saying, I appreciate the understanding that God has given me and has given you and given others that have influenced me to be in that position where that's not something that I stress about. But also it's so if when you start your day with that gratitude of, man, I'm starting from a good place, it makes an entirely different thing than it makes the wait easier. You know, someone mentioned that I had no idea, and I didn't either, that they've spent a year at Sinai. Like that part, I was like, wait, what? A whole year? I mean, it doesn't seem like. I mean, what? It doesn't seem like what they covered, at least in Scripture, or that we know about.
How could
anyway.
it be? It was only 2 verses.
Like, how could they? I was talking slow. Like what? Like how did this happen? And yet there's another part where, you know, the resting makes that part easier too. I think if you have to make that part, if you have to take that longer journey, the resting. And even the side tours, SM said, you know, like Paul and Silas sitting in a jail, spending a little time there for a good purpose of saving the jailer. God has a purpose for our life in different events. But like, why do we not always see it right away that these detours, they, to me, most of mine that have come that way usually come afterwards where it's like, oh man, is that what this was about? I'm pretty sure it's what it was about. And I really wish I'd have known that that's what it was about, because I would have also done things a lot differently had I known.
If God had just showed up and said, you know what, for the next 40 years, this is what's going to happen, rather than hindsight.
Yeah.
That would have been easier for you.
I think one of the other problems here that we have is that we make walking with Jesus like something that's beneficial in the future. Right? It's like, if you follow Jesus, you'll be saved. You'll get to go to heaven. If you do all these things, then you get to go to heaven. If you experience God's grace, you get to go to heaven. And we kind of ignore the fact that walking hand in hand with Jesus actually makes life a million times better here on earth. That it's not the kingdom, it's not just the kingdom come, it's the kingdom now. It's the kingdom that God wants to do right now in our life. And we kind of act like, you know, talking about that jailer, well, thank goodness he got to experience salvation so he'd get to go to heaven. Well, no, his life was made better right there on the spot. It's one of the reasons why people, when we talk about sharing the gospel with other people, if all you think you're doing is helping people go to heaven and you don't realize that you're actually helping them have a better life here and now, like a better life here and now, then you're really missing, I think, the majority of the gospel. Melanie and I were talking about this after I got done practice preaching the sermon Friday, is if there was no heaven, would the gospel have any power? Would there be would there be any worth in following Christ now if there was no heaven? And I know Paul says, you know, if there was no hope of the resurrection, we would be the most hopeless of people. And with all due respect to Paul, I still think that the Christian life is a good life, that it is a better life, that it makes the world a better place, and that I think the world is a better place with Christian values. And I'm not the and it's like, okay, yeah, you're a Christian pastor, so of course you say that. Well, great book that is written by an agnostic, potentially atheist historian named Tom Holland, and the book just left my brain.
It'll be in the show notes for sure. Tom Holland actually argues that Christianity has improved everything in the world. And he's arguing that, again, from an agnostic, atheist point of view, that it was unheard of to believe in human rights like we do today. Back in Jesus' time, it was unfathomable, and people didn't have rights. What are you talking about? Christianity is what did that, and there's so many other things. And I think about some of the things that are a little bit unique to Seventh-day Adventist beliefs, where we've emphasized health, and we've talked about
vegetarian diet, being careful what you put in your body, exercising, getting rest, getting all these different things. That's not, and we've made the mistake of yet again tying it to salvation in some way instead of just saying, look, it makes your life better. People who follow this lifestyle demonstrated that they live 10 years longer on average, and that not only do they live 10 years longer, but that it's in the middle of your life. It's quality years. It's not like you live 10 years longer in a nursing home. It's that you put 10 quality years into your life. And again, that doesn't mean that you don't get cancer or things that don't happen if you're doing it. But the point is, why can't we just say, Jesus wants you to be in heaven? That's certainly something. But the whole purpose of heaven is not about streets of gold and flying and petting tigers. It's about being with Jesus. It's about being with each other. And that is what I think sometimes we really miss out on because we're so heavenly minded that we're just no earthly good.
I think that works in a society where being Christian is not a capital offense. I think for people who, receive the gospel, quote unquote, who are in places where, you go to jail for that or you get thrown to the lions for that, that doesn't improve your life. But that's why I made
But I think it does, Melanie. I think that we. I'm sorry. Do you want to finish there? Because I guess I interrupted.
You caught me at a pivot point.
Okay.
That's why I made the distinction between, I made the switch earlier when I was talking about being saved and lost, and then I transitioned to the word safe instead of saved, because I think that that's the internal process and that's the rest that we were talking about, so that if this is something that you accept and your life is going to get harder, internally, though, there's still the sense of safe.
That's a whole nother, because you're right. If the external part of you is going to be going through a ton worse than if you'd just never said, like, externally, you just carry on as life is normal, you wouldn't maybe even want to admit because of the ramifications of being Christian in a culture that's not going to accept it. Wow.
Well, but that's the whole idea of what do we mean when we say makes life better? Are we talking about having more money? Are we talking about having no suffering, no pain? Is that what makes life better? I mean, I think that God gives us some different tools that if everybody were employing them, it would make all those things better. But ultimately, to me, the better part of life is that when you have Christ and when you rest in Christ, I believe that whatever external suffering is happening to you, internally, you are more able to cope with it and to have resilience and peace. And that's what I think. I think that is one of the major benefits of the gospel. And it's not about stuff. It's about emotional rest.
It can't be about stuff. Too many people, whether you're Christian or not, the divide between, if you will, the have some, the have less, the have a little more, the have nots, the have everythings. I mean, that doesn't run. To me, that doesn't run along whether or not your religious affiliation overall. I mean, there's a lot of Christians that suffer, extreme poverty and great wealth. But I think that I don't see a real difference in the people that aren't Christian. I think that and I don't know why that is. I guess there's lots of things that can make that.
Well, you have to wonder what it for those who do physically suffer for Christ. When you think about the Jesus disciples, you think about Paul, all the suffering that Paul went through. What is the motivator for people to go through that kind of suffering why would they do that? Is it because they're afraid of going to hell? So they like, well, if I have to suffer here, it's better than suffering in hell or whatever else. Is that the motivator? And when I read stories from people who have been in countries that outlaw Christianity and have really stiff penalties for it, when I hear their stories, most of those stories don't revolve around they fear God. They're more afraid of God than they are afraid of their country. So they're like, well, I'm going to do what God wants because I'm terrified of what God will do to me if I don't. What I hear in those stories consistently is that in a place where they feel like they have no meaning, no value, that the gospel of Christ brings meaning and purpose and a sense of belonging and a internal peace. And that's the reason why they do and believe and are willing to suffer and are willing to even die for their faith and for what they believe in, because it has changed them internally, not because they're afraid of some consequence.
I think that's a sliding scale depending where you are, though, because in almost at the beginning, you almost have no choice but to be a little fearful of God, right? And like, well, I mean, if you're putting broccoli or ice cream in front of me, one being hell, one being heaven, I mean, there's obviously a better choice. So whether or not that's like, whether I'm fearful, like, well, I'm going to have to eat that broccoli. I can eat the broccoli. I've done it before. It's not going to, well, it might kill me, but in the end, which broccoli, just saying, hey, but at the same time, I think the further you go into your relationship with God, that's where you feel like, yeah, this is worth it. I do live a better life. And when you see those results of going through some of the same trials that you've gone through before you were relying on God that way, or maybe you were just scared, I think you start to feel differently. And that's when when people ask you, like you said, if you're finding the rest, how can you be calm? How come this doesn't bother you? Why are you like that answer doesn't seem to compute with what I know of God. And I think that's the part where it's really great to share the gospel for someone who has been struggling that cannot find the rest, or they feel like maybe that fear is the part that's really got them going, ooh boy, I guess I better toe the line, because if you wake up tomorrow and everything wasn't right.
If the gospel is rest, and I think that's something we need to sell to Christians before we sell it to anybody else.
No, you're not wrong for sure. All right, well, let's get selling, people. So we're going to be doing an interim class on how. No, just kidding. We kind of do every week. That's kind of what we do here. So I think we hit everyone's questions through from the chat earlier this week. And it was I just want to say a shout out to all of you that listened that were in the chat. It was a robust conversation between first and second this past week. And again, you guys can always join the conversation. Even if you were sitting in the worship center, just go ahead and get out your phone and text a question to us. And we'll make sure to catch it on next week's or on the following episode.
What's the phone number for that if you said text a question?
407-965-1607. And if you're lucky, Randy won't forget to add it. I did check this morning, and I did check my email right before I got here. So that was everything. And now, Ken, you ready?
I'm ready.
You look good.
Thank you.
I feel like you got some rest over this weekend. I think you are going to need it. Because if you haven't been paying attention or you just missed it, the Great Question series, which annually peeks its head out about this time of year and says, let's give Ken like 4 or 5 days to really ponder deep thought kind of stuff. And let's throw the hard balls as fast as we can and see which ones Melanie will pick to give to Ken. And so this year, question 1, Melanie, do you want to give it to us in the, I don't know how you want to, do you know it by heart?
I don't know.
You did an announcement about it. I saw you on screen.
Well, so the idea is that we are increasingly dependent on
AI.
artificial intelligence. So we use it for all kinds of things, and I think we even use it for things that we don't realize we're using it for.
Oh, yeah.
But industry experts say that AI is going to change humanity as we know it. So how does that fit into our Christian worldview?
Sounds like an REM song. Right?
And we feel fine.
And we feel fine.
Well, I'm not too worried about this one, Randy. I already have 4 sermons that ChatGPT
that you've generated.
So how's it been doing?
It was interesting. I think that as we'll talk about on Sabbath about this topic, that AI is a phenomenal tool for researching, for getting information, for comparing information, for automating different parts of our life that's pretty cool. At least to this point, it's not, in my opinion, the most creative way of putting information together.
Yeah.
And when I look at the sermons that ChatGPT put together for me, I will use some of the information from it, but I think that I think the human spirit appreciates other people connecting their experiences, and that's one of the reasons why I tell a lot of stories in sermons. It's one of the reasons why I tend to tell stories about myself too, because I think that we connect with each other, we connect with ideas when we hear that, and I think ChatGPT can do a fantastic job putting together a research paper. I think it has to work a little harder to connect on a spiritual level.
So are you gonna, as I think it was at second, you're gonna let us read the ChatGPT?
I thought one of the things I did that I thought was fun was I put the kind of the prompt in and I actually put in a how did I word it? I think I said how should we look at artificial intelligence from a Christian worldview? And then I said from a Muslim worldview, and then I said from a Hindu worldview.
Oh wow!
And then from a Seventh-day Adventist Christian worldview, and it was interesting to see how they crafted the sermons. That it was it was a 20-minute sermon. I said, give me a 20-minute sermon on how to look at. So anyway, it's an interesting thing. I'll probably post them somewhere so that people can take a look at it on their own and see. I thought it was fascinating to see the elements that were the same in the sermons and the elements that were different based on what worldview you were coming from.
Taking a snapshot of AI and what it's capable of doing right now, and the way that it has been transformed over the past few years, even the quote unquote upgrade, I guess, to GPT-4, where it thinks through things much more deeply. There may be a time when it actually starts thinking through spiritual things and coming up with deeper thought than it's currently capable of.
Yeah, I mean, we can't deny how quickly technology is evolving, and so one of the fun things for this week is we have one of the folks who attends church here at Whole Life, Dexter Hadley, who's actually coming in today, and we're going to do an interview with him because Dexter works with AI. He's worked in several different places, and so we're going to do an interview with him. So he's going to help me with my sermon a little bit by giving me some human information, but then I thought it'd be fun for us to put a little video before the sermon of him talking about what he thinks from an AI researcher standpoint we ought to know about it. So,
well, maybe those ChatGPT could hang out on Ken's blog. That way,
that's true. I should have,
because that way, we haven't had a ton of traction yet, but we've also just it's been a starter. So this might be a good place for everyone to find those and find the rest.
You want to do something really funny? Go on ChatGPT and ask it to write your bio. Just tell him your name. It works well if you have an unusual name. Tell it who you are and have it write your bio and see how accurate it is.
Interesting.
Oh boy.
Okay. I have not done that yet.
All right. If for some reason you
guys... Maybe can you have it write your obituary too?
Probably, yeah.
Well, take the Melanie challenge and have ChatGPT write your bio.
or your obituary, either one.
Keep it, and
I think this may be what I do for Game Master this week. Have people
But send it if it comes back with something that you find to be funny or creative. Send them in, and if we have time, maybe next week we'll read one or two if you guys want to send those in, because I'm curious now. I'm going to have to do that. So I'm just curious about this whole week and what we're going to be talking about with Dexter. You said today,
Dexter Hadley.
Dexter here, and so man, you're definitely not going to want to miss next week. So AI, it is to the rescue, to the detriment, to whatever it will be. So there you go.
I thought it was kind of fun that I had a couple of our young adults, teens, came up to me afterwards and they're like, please don't mess this up.
All right. So on that note, guys, thanks for listening. Have a great week. We're not going to mess it up. We promise.
Well,
maybe.
Randy promises.